What's up fam, my name is Tech, and welcome to my Mass Effect 3 multiplayer guide for the Human Engineer. I used to love Mass Effect 3 multiplayer back on the Xbox 360, and when I started getting back into it on PC, I found nobody had made any videos on it in years. So in making this video, I intend to document any information I find, and hopefully spread awareness that people are still playing this game. If you have any advice for me or other new players, please drop a comment, and I'll be dropping links to useful information in the description. With that being said, the Human Engineer. It has standard movement, being able to sprint, roll, and use cover to full effectiveness. They also have standard durability stats, as they have 500 health and shields by default. For melee, it has a 3-hit combo as well as a fire slash for its heavy melee. And its class tree Alliance training is the same for all the base human classes. You can get power damage, and weapon weight bonuses. Let's go over the active abilities. Your first one is Combat Drone. This ability spawns an AI-controlled drone at the point you're aiming or next to your position. The drone has a variety of uses, including scouting spawn areas, distracting enemies, stunning enemies, and dealing some damage. By default, it'll seek out enemies and shock them at close range. However, its behavior can change depending on the perks you choose. Most notably, rank 6A gives a long-range rocket instead of its regular attack. When you take this perk, the drone will no longer move close to enemies, which makes some perks like rank 4B's detonate have anti-synergy. Keep this in mind when trying to max out the drone. Its use will diminish the higher you go in difficulties, as enemies will have higher health and more damage. However, this does make rank 4B's detonate a more attractive option. I would suggest against using any more than 4 ranks if you're planning to go gold or platinum. 2 of the other more notable perks include rank 5A, which gives an AoE shock separate from its default attack, and rank 6B, which makes its default attack chain to 3 additional targets. Your next ability is Incinerate. This ability is pretty simple but also pretty effective. It's one of the main ways you'll be doing damage with this class. It does about 70% of its damage on impact and the remaining 25% over a 3-second burn. It does 1.5 times damage to armored targets but only does half damage to shields. It can also panic unprotected enemies. It's a primer for fire combos as well as a detonator for everything but biotic combos. These traits add up to making it the go-to power to use against any foes without shields or barriers. This class has another way to deal with shields, which we'll get into soon. Incinerate is single target by default. However, at rank 4B you have the option of taking Radius, which can change that. At first glance, one might not consider Radius to be worth it compared to more damage. However, it has several benefits to consider. With the Radius perk, you can often hit enemies who try to dodge it, as it'll hit the surface and splash to them. It also allows you to hit multiple targets, which not only makes you do more damage overall, but it will prime all targets hit for fire combos. The final rank 6 perk is also a pretty interesting choice. You get a choice between freeze combo damage or armor damage. Freeze combo increases the initial damage and the damage over time to frozen targets by 100%. And armor damage increases Incinerate's damage to armor by 50%. Technically, the freeze damage increase is more valuable, but since you can't take advantage of it on your own, most of the time armor damage is the better choice. Also, a fun fact about Incinerate, which I only just learned researching this video: Incinerate burns the bodies of the enemies it kills. This is useful against Reapers, as cannibals get less chances to buff themselves. Overload is next up. It's a targeted shock burst that's most used for stripping shields, as it does triple damage to shields and barriers. On unprotected targets, it'll either do regular or half damage to synthetics and organics respectively. Though the damage varies, it always remains an effective ability to use regardless of the target for a few reasons. First, like Incinerate, it's both a primer and a detonator. Second, it'll stun almost all infantry level enemies, whether they're protected or not. The stun can actually come in 2 forms, one where the target doubles over in pain and another where they appear electrocuted, which is somewhat like a crit stun. This occurs less often and is a longer duration. This could be further enhanced by the rank 5 Neuroshock, which instantly downs unprotected organic infantry. Overload also has a few perks that allow it to chain to another target, doing 60% damage. It's highly recommended to take the first one of these because all the crowd control this has can also apply to the second target. Also, even though only the first target will be primed for a tech combo, all targets chained to will be detonated. There are 2 primary ways I think this class should be played. The first one is more team reliant and is intended to be more like a support class. With this build, you'll be maxing out the combat drone, taking the perks Shields and Damage, Shock, and Chain Lightning. These perks will give your drone a good amount of durability as well as maxing out its disruption capabilities. If you want to sacrifice a bit of durability for more CC, you can take Detonate at rank 4. Then max out Incinerate, taking Radius, Recharge Speed, and Armor damage. The Radius perk is most essential here, as it'll allow you to prime multiple targets as well as potentially panic more targets. Next, you'll be maxing out Overload. Go for both Chain Lightning perks and Neural Shock. Your ability to strip shields alone will be weaker, but you will have the highest CC you can get with this class. Also, even if your single target shield damage will be lower, you'll be hitting more targets, meaning your group shields will be affected. Your passives tend to be preference, but I like to take 4 ranks in both for some extra recharge speed and durability. This build specializes in crowd control as well as doing a lot of small damage across multiple targets. This small damage can add up over time, and you can also prime many targets that you or your team can detonate. This strategy can be fairly powerful on bronze and silver difficulties, but because it's so team reliant and it focuses heavily on combat drone, I wouldn't recommend it in gold plus. The second build is that of a combo mage. With this, you take 4 ranks in combat drone, taking detonate. Here, you still get the utility it provides. However, knowing that the drone is not likely to live longer on higher difficulties, all we need here is detonate. It will not only stagger some enemies, but it also detonates combos aside from biotics, which makes it pretty useful. Like the last build, you should max out incinerate. The only perk I prefer here is burning damage over recharge speed. However, both are good. You'll be maxing out overload as well. The difference here is rank 6B, shield damage. Since you're trying to max out damage and self-reliance, you'll want to be able to remove as much shield as possible with each overload. For your passives, focus on all the power-related talents in the alliance training, and get rank 4 durability from fitness. This group does lots of damage to both single targets and groups, as you'll be focusing on incinerate to prime 1 or more targets and overload to detonate. If overload chains to 2 targets that have been primed by incinerate, they'll both be detonated, which will do lots of damage to enemies in the area. Each fire explosion will also deal double damage to armor. This build has a small variant if you choose to pass on combat drone entirely. You're able to get the final 2 durability perks in the fitness tree. The gear bonus you'll want with this class will be anything that gives tech damage or recharge speed. The Omni Capacitor is probably the best option as it gives both. Your weapons here are mostly preference. You generally want to have low weight weapons so you can get the 200% recharge speed bonus. Also consider that you want weapons that excel in mid to short range. I'd recommend heavy pistols and submachine guns if you have ultralight materials for them. This class does not tend to struggle against any health types, so something like anti-shields or synthetic weapons are not necessary. Now onto some overall tips. In combat, you'll want to consider what you are facing when you choose your spell order. Both Overload and Incinerate prime and detonate each other, therefore your cast order is free for your choice, but there are a few things to consider. Overload Incinerate gives you a tech burst, which does 2 times damage to shields and barriers. If your priority is to strip shields, consider this order. Incinerate Overload will give you a fire burst, which does 2 times damage to armor. You should also consider that Incinerate with Radius will prime multiple targets. Overload will not, however it will detonate multiple targets. Because of this, I often like to use Incinerate first when enemies are clumped, even if they're protected. You have the potential to hit a group with 2 fire bursts instead of 1 tech burst. Another tip, try using cryo rounds. If you attack your enemy with cryo shots, they can be frozen fairly quickly, which will not only add to your already strong CC, but it will prime them for a cryo burst. This makes your combos even more potent, as you can do cryo, incinerate, overload, giving 2 AoE bursts in a short time. Should you choose to run combat drone, the best times to use it are when you have no enemies around. In between rounds, you can drop it near spawn points and it will scout for you while delaying the enemy for a short time. Also drop it whenever you're running through the map and you have nothing to attack. This class synergizes very well with classes that have Snap Freeze. Snap Freeze can also prime multiple targets, which means if you and your teammate are using Snap Freeze and Overload every 2 seconds, you can spam freeze bursts. This class is probably best against the Reapers. Most of the enemies are either unprotected or have armor, which means you can do heavy damage with fire combos. Also, they tend to clump often, so you can get good use out of your AoE capabilities. I would say this class doesn't particularly struggle against any of the factions, but if I was forced to choose, I would say it's worst against Cerberus. Because it doesn't have any inherent survivability, it can have trouble against durable flanking enemies, and you can be easily killed by phantoms and dragoons. Although your fire combos will melt dragoons if you see them coming. That should be all you need to know to start with the Human Engineer. If you like this video, please drop a like so the YouTube algorithm lets other people know this game is still being played. And if you want to continue learning this game with me, I'll be making more of these guides in the future. Later fam.